questions. I'm sorry we're starting a little bit late. I think the weather really threw a lot of people off today. I know that Senator Warren will be in just a little bit later. She got caught in traffic, and I think someone might have had an accident, because they don't know. We Kansans don't really understand what to do when it rains or snows. So anyway, welcome everyone. I don't believe we have a quorum. Could you tell me who all is on by WebEx, please? I'm sorry, did I wake her to tell us? All right.
I'm sorry. This is Senator Warren.
We're glad you're with us.
Yep, I'll be there in just a minute. Thanks for starting.
Were you able to get Representative Wagner invited and send him the link? You sent him the link. Okay. All right. Make sure I'll wait until maybe a couple more people come, and we'll find out setting a date of the next meeting somewhere between January 20th and 26th. So keep your calendars open and let me know. We'll go ahead. Oh, did I say January? June. It's a J. It's one of those J's. Let's go ahead and get started. We'll start with the Department of Revenue. Taylor Murray, attorney. Welcome to committee. Please introduce yourself.
Good morning, committee. My name is Taylor Murray. I'm with the Office of Policy and Research at the Department of Revenue. I'd like to thank the committee for its time today considering these. I know it's a very busy time. So the department has two sets of regulations today. The first set, the department proposes amending two cigarette tax regulations. That's KAR 92-5-9 and 92-5-10. Cigarette tax is paid by the wholesale dealer, and the department issues tax stamps to dealers as evidence of tax paid. So KSA 793312 governs refunds to wholesale dealers if tax stamps are returned unused or if they've become damaged and unfit for sale. According to statute, there's a certain percentage, now that's 0.55%, that's deducted from that refund in either case. This isn't a fee paid to the department. It's just money that remains in state funds that isn't refunded. So KR 92-5-9 and 5-10 refer to this deduction percentage. The exact percentage has been changed in statute several times, and these regulations haven't been amended to update those to reflect those changes. So they currently refer to the wrong percentage. So right now the department charges the statutory rates. The regulations are not effective in that way. So the proposed amendments, they simply tie the percentage in the regulations directly to the one in statute. So there's not that mismatch between the rates. And the public hearing for these is May 24th at 9 a.m. So far, we haven't received any comments on these regulations. And I'm happy to stand for questions on these regulations, so I can go on to the second set.
Does anyone have any questions on this first set? My only question is, I had to look up the tax stamps for cigarettes. So is there literally a stamp, or is it paper, or because it seems to me there was always something kind of glued on to?
Right. My understanding is that it's like I don't know if it's made of paper. It's a physical stamp, which is why it can be damaged or destroyed. We actually have some people here from our cigarette tax area. If you'd like to ask some more questions, maybe about the practical or procedural, but it is a physical item.
Okay. Would one of you please come up, introduce yourself, please?
Good morning. I'm Marcy Rosencutter. I'm the supervisor for the cigarette and tobacco unit. The stamp is actually ink, and it's layer upon layer of ink, and then it is heat applied to the end of the pack of cigarettes.
Okay. Does every cigarette?
Every cigarette pack has one on there.
Okay. And you supply them?
Yes.
Okay. Anyone have any questions? Thank you for coming. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
And without seeing any other questions on that, go ahead and with your second part, please.
Okay, so for the second set, the department proposes revoking 6 regulations. These are all involve motor fuel tax. So the first 5, which are KR 9237, 10, 11, 12A, and 14, those provide rules for motor fuel carrier fuel tank markings and measurements. So when these regulations were created, the Department of Revenue was involved in inspecting carriers at designated ports of entry or motor carrier inspection sites to assess fuel taxes. The department no longer relies on these methods to assess fuel taxes. It's now much more relying on paperwork, technology. So the department has determined these 5 regulations are out of date and they're no longer necessary. If you'd like, there's the 6th regulation is a little different. So again, I can stand for questions on those 5, or I can move on to the final regulation if there's no questions.
Are there any questions? I apologize. My simple request is I understand everything's revoked. I would like for there to be a brief description what's being revoked
Of course.
underneath, only because things sometimes slip past that we're not aware have been changed. So
Of course.
that for everyone is just to have something that it gives us more information, just brief piece of information.
Okay. So in the future, you'd like that submitted as, okay. Would you like me now? I can go ahead and just do a verbal summary of the 5, or?
I think you just did.
Okay.
So thank you.
I appreciate it. So the final, KR 92319, this again, we're proposing revoking it. So it supports a 2.5% handling allowance that is in KSA 793408. So the motor fuel tax is imposed with an allowance for spillage or waste. It's recognizing that sometimes fuel is lost by distributors. When the regulation was adopted by statute, only distributors whose, quote, principal business, unquote, was marketing motor fuels or petroleum products were permitted the handling allowance. This principal business requirement was removed. The statute was amended to remove it. So this regulation is no longer necessary. And I'm happy to stand for questions on that final one as well.
It's been very controversial, so I don't see any questions. Does anyone have a question on this? Anyone online? If not, I think you're done being on the hot seat. So thank you for being here.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for your time.
All right. Well, now we're making up time, aren't we? Well, welcome Eric Turek from the Insurance Department. Welcome to committee and thanks for being here.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. Eric Turek with the Kansas Department of Insurance, and we are here today to go over 3 regulations under our proposal. 1 would be a complete revocation, and 2 would be some amendments, and I'm happy to go into those. Going in order, KAR 40. Apologize about my voice as well. KAR 40-1-36. This concerns life insurance, and so as some of you may know, when life insurance policies are issued, oftentimes a medical examination takes place on the insured individual that can range from a whole host of an executive physical to other tests. And so this specific regulation concerns testing an individual to see if they have HIV antibodies. In the current regulation, if you look at page 2, section D, it will describe how one specific test is required at the an initial test, and then section E it describes a second test. That second test in the current reg now, it describes the only permissible test, which is the Western blot test. I'll be honest, the industry brought this to our attention. I believe there's only one manufacturer of this test in the country currently. This is an outdated test that really is no longer used by the CDC, and so this would just be expanding the permissible tests to be used to determine if an individual has tests positive for HIV antibodies. I don't think that this test is really used commonly in the U.S. at all anymore, so we are seeking to expand that. I'd be happy to repeat anything or move on to the next regulation, Madam Chair.
Thank you
Madam
very
Chair.
much, Mr. Turk, and apologize that I do know how to drive in the rain, and I was not in an accident, so it's all good. But we do wish Kansans and those traveling on our roads today drive with caution and safe travels to everyone. So I'm all caught up. I was listening on WebEx. Thank you for that. And if there aren't any questions, we can move on to the next.
Madam Chair, one quick question.
I was going to say Representative Penn is on WebEx with a question.
Yes, Madam Chair, I'm downstairs coming through the rain as well. I'm headed up. Thank you, Mr. Turk, for being here today. Quick question concerning the test and the opening up for other testing. Number one, are the other tests that are going to be included going forward, are they as responsive to detection as the one that you're getting rid of? And what impact does that have on insurance companies to cover those tests or any resulting retrovirals?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll state this too. I believe that the last time that this regulation was updated was 1988. So there's a lot of there have been a whole host of medical advancements since then. The language that we have chosen to insert here would be any other confirmatory test approved by the FDA and HHS. So there have been numerous medical advancements when it comes to the detection of really any blood detectable diseases, and so this will help insurance companies in that regard.
Absolutely. Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate that answer, Mr. Turk. Thank you.
Thank you. Committee, other questions? Not seeing any, then go ahead and proceed. Thank you.
The second regulation is KAR 40-4-29A. This is a complete repeal. Essentially, when so Section A of the current regulation states that a health insurance company cannot terminate one's health insurance policy solely based off of their eligibility for Medicare, and this is duplicative. This is already in statute. It already prohibits that termination of one's health insurance policy because of that. And then the second portion of that reg, each insurer shall mail to its current individual medical policy holders approaching age 65 or Medicare eligibility information about Medicare, a notice provided by the Kansas Department of Insurance. And I'll admit that what ultimately occurs with this regulation is that the insurance companies are sending a notice with the department's name and the commissioner's name on it. So it confuses individuals. Literally just yesterday, we got a call on this because it's an insurance company sending something on behalf of the insurance department, and it's confusing. And honestly, this is outdated and obsolete. I think that Kansans know when they approach 65 that they are Medicare eligible. The insurance company can provide extra information if they wish, but this reg is really just obsolete and unnecessary. So happy to stand for questions on that. And I have a copy of that notice too. It doesn't have any, it's just text that we provide to the companies. And so to eliminate confusion, we seek to eliminate the reg altogether.
Thank you. Is there other requirements anywhere that Kansans approaching the age of 65 receive this notice?
That's a great question. I will say that the department has a whole host of resources on our website concerning folks who are approaching age 65, information on Medicare Supplement and Medicare Advantage, et cetera.
Thank you. Committee, other questions? Not seeing any. Go ahead.
Great. And the last one concerns surplus lines or excess lines. So the legislature in 2023 passed House Bill 2090, which reduced the surplus lines tax rate from 6% to 3%. This honestly just completely updates the regulation to reflect those changes. If there are surplus lines agents who do not conduct business, and there are some, we would no longer need an affidavit or annual statement from them. And then additionally, In section B, we are changing that language to reflect statutory updates that took place in 2022, whereby if an agent fails to pay their surplus lines premium tax on time, the department can charge an assessment up to twice the amount of the tax. Again, this is already in statute, and I think in practice we charge 10% to begin with. So,
Any questions? Not seeing any, then thank you for your presentation today.
you.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Committee, next we will hear from the Kansas Department of Health and Environment, Derek Flurledge, Director, Bureau of Family Health. Please introduce yourself and welcome to committee. Are we expecting? Okay, he's on his way. Okay, great. Then if we have our next conferee present, we can go ahead and proceed with that. From the Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks, Dan Riley, Chief Counsel, not present either. So is he on WebEx? I see he'll be participating via WebEx. Well, I don't want to get too far ahead of our agenda. Just a moment, please. Committee, while we are pausing our other business for our conferees to arrive, let's go back and take a look at the minutes that were sent out for approval. Are there any discussion on the minutes, or the chair would entertain a motion? Yes, Representative Wassinger.
Madam Chair, I move that we accept the minutes as presented on March 15th, 2024.
Thank you. The second from Senator Francisco. Any discussion? You all have heard the motion then. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The motion carries and the minutes are approved. Thank you. And we could go ahead and proceed with that business, because with our members also attending on WebEx, we do have a quorum for our committee meeting. And we will stand at ease for just a few moments. Committee, we do have next on the agenda at 9:45 the Kansas Department of Health and Environment. So we're going to stand at ease until 9:45, or if the director of KDHE appears in committee earlier, we can go ahead and get started with that. But we're going to just stand at ease while we wait. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for your patience while the committee was standing at ease so that we could have our next conferee present. However, I do want to take care of one other piece of business before we proceed. And let's take a look at our next meeting date, if we can do that real quickly. We're looking at June 20 through 26th of 2024. And I'm proposing either June 20th or June 21st for a meeting in the morning. And I'll go ahead and suggest Thursday morning, June 20th at 9 a.m. Does that sound acceptable, agreeable to everyone? Looks like it. So, and anyone on WebEx have a objection? Not hearing any, then we'll go ahead and schedule our next meeting of this committee, June 20th, 2024 at 9 a.m. Thank you. And with that, then, we are a little bit ahead of schedule, but thank you to the Department of Health and Environment for appearing today and early. So appreciate that. So please introduce yourself and welcome to committee.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee.
Is your microphone on?
It should be. I can talk a little bit closer to it. That work? Okay, perfect. Thank you all for having me. Thanks for the opportunity to present on the proposed changes to childcare licensing regulations. My name is Derek Flerlock. I'm the Bureau Director for the Bureau of Family Health at the Kansas Department of Health and Environment. The Bureau itself contains many different programs, but most notably for today's proceedings, childcare licensing program. And while I'm responsible for ultimate oversight of the program, I do so in partnership with my two childcare licensing co-directors, Jarvis Stolman and Melissa Schoenberger. Melissa's present today to assist in answering any questions you may have, as well as a couple other staff that have worked on this project. The childcare licensing program is the regulatory program for all licensed childcare programs in Kansas. This has actually been the case since 1919 with the passing of the original Child Care Act signed into law by Governor Allen. The program is responsible for the health and safety portion of the Child Care State Plan, which is administered by the Kansas Department for Children and Families. This is a requirement of the Federal Child Care Development Block Grant and the Child Care and Development Fund, otherwise known as CCDF. And we currently license 8 program types across the state. The purpose of our program is to reduce preventable harm to children while they are in out-of-home care. The program provides a basic level of protection for all children while ensuring a standard for health and safety in child care facilities all across the state. The program not only provides the regulation framework, but more importantly, supports and offers ongoing technical assistance to licensed child care providers in our state. This has definitely been an intense focus for our program over the last 12 to 18 months, really making our licensing specialists, as we call them now, formerly surveyors, a point of connection for communities, not just that regulatory basis, but truly a helpful face and somebody that providers and potential providers and even families can go to for assistance and to get their questions answered. At one time, most notably after the passage of Lexi's Law, Kansas was considered a proactive state in terms of child care and health and safety oversight. After the reauthorization of CCDF in 2016 and subsequent federal review, Kansas has been deemed non-compliant on some federal requirements for several years. KDHE must be in compliance with these federal requirements to be deemed compliant and to retain the funding that makes our system possible, including providing Kansas families with much needed child care assistance funds. In response to the federal requirements and with tremendous input from licensed providers and stakeholders, the child care licensing team embarked on a comprehensive regulatory review and rewrite, all centered around a strategic plan to address 4 different categories for review. This includes the federal compliance items that I had just mentioned that we needed to come up to par with, our home providers, center and preschool providers, and our existing school age and drop-in programs. Our internal regulation review team, which consisted of our own KDHE internal staff, we had an expert consultant that was able to assist us as a subject matter expert. We first met to begin this review just a year ago in April of 2023. And our approach was definitely to directly involve providers in the drafting of the regulations. After all, you can't draft a good regulation if you don't include those that are most closely affected by them. So we wanted their feedback and actually their assistance in drafting, and I can talk a little bit about that too. In June of 2023, we held our first provider engagement session. We utilized our database, which we have all of our licensed providers and their information, to reach out and send invites to all of them to request their assistance. The first session was a brainstorm kind of a think take style engagement session where we presented on the background of the regulation review, a little bit like I'm doing now, highlighted the regulations that we had noted for potential revisions, and then requested feedback from the providers. So at that point, we might not have had, distinct language to review, but we really wanted their feedback on, hey, this is the direction we're thinking of going. What do you think that looks like? How do you feel about that? What's your feedback on that? And we wanted to know in all corners of the state what our providers thought. In July of 2023, just a month after that first review, we had a second engagement session. We did the same thing. We reached out and invite, and this included some pretty graphics that we put on social media. We sent out via email and that sort of thing to invite them again. This one, we were able to actually present them with drafted language and to request more specific review of the language and ask for their opinions on how the drafted language may affect them positively, negatively, or somewhere in between. Both sessions we held on Saturday mornings for a length of 3 hours. And the general format that we followed is we split them into 1 hour blocks. The first hour was designed for our home providers, the second for our centers and preschools, and then that third hour was school age and drop-in programs. We did obviously invite them to stay for the full 3 hour window if they would like to. Each 3 hour window, we covered the federal requirement piece, and then we got more specifically into the licensed provider type in those respective 1 hour blocks. So if providers were unable to attend or simply wanted to rewatch and take notes for feedback, they could watch the posted recording on our newly designed dedicated regulation review page. And in addition to that, we actually created an online survey for each session where we requested feedback from providers, partners, and members of the public, while also having multiple forms of conversation via email and other platforms. Jarvis Dolman and I actually were out in Garden City for a regional public health meeting, and we had a provider reach out to us, and she said, "Oh my gosh, I'm in Garden right now. I'm grocery shopping. Can I come meet you guys?" We're like, "Yes, absolutely." So she drove to, I believe it was City Hall, if I recall correctly, and so we had some kind of informal engagements like that too, if providers wanted to meet us and chat through some stuff. Through this engagement with more than 400 licensed providers, we've been able to map that engagement based on the zip code that they provided. And it was really interesting. We had providers quite literally in every corner of the state, your urban, your rural communities. And we actually had some that had zip codes that were listed across state lines. So perhaps they live in Oklahoma or Nebraska, but drive into Kansas to work as a childcare provider or staff. We also had additional discussion with internal KDHE licensing staff. So when we talk about discussing with providers, we also went to our internal staff and elicited the same feedback. We had meetings with external partners and more, and we were able to craft proposed regulatory changes. And we do feel confident that this reflects the consensus of our Kansas childcare providers. The results of that input led to proposed regulations. The 39 proposed regulations govern both childcare centers and family daycare homes. That family daycare homes is a new category of in-home licensing, and that is replacing licensed and group daycare homes. So currently, as it exists, we have two separate licenses for in-home providers. We have licensed daycare home and then group daycare home. One of the issues that you get into currently is when somebody wants to switch back and forth, perhaps they want to be a group daycare home, or if they want to be a group and go to a licensed daycare home, they have to actually submit an application, and it's just more red tape, and we want to cut that out. So we've consolidated those two down into one license type for home providers, and we believe that that'll lead to flexibility for the providers to have one provider on site, two providers on site, and lead to that good in-home care that we all love. The proposed changes affect all aspects of a licensed facility, and it does bring our child care licensing program up to date with federal rule and current best practices. And as part of the economic impact statements, we do note minimal costs to the regulated community. The public hearing is scheduled for Tuesday, June 4th at 9 a.m. at Memorial Hall Auditorium here in Topeka. And as part of that public comment, we've also created another online submission form. This, along with other relevant information, is located on our main webpage, kdhe.ks.gov/kidsnet. And we have it right front and center. We also still have the dedicated regulation review page where folks can go to that. We've even created a fun graphic that shows people what the regulation review process looks like, and all the stamps that it requires and the process that they go through. And we've sent that out to providers too, as we kind of wanted to keep them updated as we've gone through the process, if a period of time would pass and they hadn't heard from us on it, we wanted to let them know, hey, it's still moving forward. It's just in this part of the process, wherever that may be. So again, I thank you for the opportunity to appear, and I will now stand for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And, for the public who's following along online, it might be um, helpful and educational if you could briefly touch on just briefly, what the proposed changes are. And again, just briefly.
Sure.
Thank you. And then as we go through those, if a committee member has a question, we can stop at any time. And we have Representative Penn with a question right now.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't mean to part. Thank you, sir, for being here today and for your testimony. I know that in the childcare space, we've taken up some legislation, so we appreciate everything that you're doing in that space. I know it's very, very difficult to wrap your arms around all of the complexities. So it's not, and judging by the size of your packet, it's not without warrant that you guys have a pretty wicked problem set before you. Uh, Mine, Madam Chair, is more of a question about the concept, if you will. I appreciate for your testimony that you guys have done extensive effort, if you will, to engage the community of providers up and down the chain. I do feel, however, just hearing from the testimony that you presented, and it's apropos that you're about to go through what the actual regulatory changes are, is that the legislature was not included in any of this, right? And I'm just talking about from the high level, conceptual level, if you will. If DC is going to push down regulations that we have to be compliant with, right? I would imagine that the legislature should get a crack at it and be presented with it to actually, you know, put into law what those regulatory changes would be versus being backdoored from DC to your provider level and leave us completely out. Because I think that there might be some impact of some of these regulations that we would like to have eyes on, and as the representatives of the people in both chambers to have a say on, especially if it impacts what the landscape is going to be inside the state of Kansas. I don't think that the people of Kansas or the legislature wants to cede their authority to DC for a top-down type of administration, if you will. And so, in order to, as you said, to get the funding that's associated with it, we have to get compliant with whatever their regulatory changes are. I've been through several committees in my tenure where we've had the opportunity to see what it is that DC is pushing down and determine whether or not we want to change our law in order to access said carrots or sticks. I just think that from what you've posed here, we haven't had that opportunity. So I would love to hear your thoughts about sending some of these regulatory changes back in a bill or whatever to the legislature in the next, either in an interim, Madam Chair, or in the next legislative session. Thank you.
Yeah, comment back.
Yes, please, please do.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Representative Penn. Yeah, I would say, as far as our engagement with lawmakers go, we did have several meetings since beginning the regulatory review last year. There was some outreach. We sent a memo, I believe, January 31st to this committee that highlighted those changes, including the timeline in the full proposal stamped Department of Administration regulations at the time, because they weren't stamped by the Attorney General's office quite yet. But we did send our proposed changes on the 31st of January. As far as feedback kind of through the process, we certainly invited any members of the public to attend those feedback sessions, and we did make lawmakers aware of the feedback sessions and the surveys. We received several emails from lawmakers on a daily basis asking questions and looking to learn about the childcare landscape. Of course, we have that licensing, regulatory component, and then there's all of the other components that might be out of KDHE's scope, but we're still involved in some of the quality pieces or the child care assistance funds that DCF administers. And so we like to be part of those conversations as well. As far as the funding and how it trickles down to Kansas and through the proposed regulations, one of the groups that we did work with through this was the Federal Office of Child Care. So when we proposed language, we would send it to them and ask them how it looks. Sometimes you don't always get a clear-cut answer like, hey, that's great. Sometimes they'll say that doesn't work, but they don't tell you how to make it work. So we work through that and kind of get their blessing to make sure that the state's still going to receive those CCDF funds. Because without those CCDF funds, there's no child care assistance. So, but I would definitely say we attempted a concerted effort to get lawmakers involved into the process. As far as a bill to address some of this, I think our stance has been through some of the legislation and some of our testimony on those bills is that we don't think that regulations should necessarily be in state statute due to limited flexibility. We've been able to grant roughly 700 plus exceptions, so exception to regulation, since about 2019. And a majority of those that we do receive are a request to exceed capacity, and the majority of those have been granted as well. Of course, if a facility or a provider has a history with noncompliance or some higher level health and safety issues like safe sleep, or maybe they've been over capacity themselves without being granted an exception, then we may deny on those grounds. But largely, I think we've been able to respond to the needs of communities through that exception process. And that's why we like to see things kept in regulation. And I would say, Representative Penn, too, one of the things that I'd really highlight is we can engage in a regulatory review at our leisure. And it's been a real focus for the department and for the child care licensing program. So, through last year's session, we knew we needed to make changes. Before that, we knew we needed to make changes. And so we came around in April and said, let's get this thing going. We did it in, less than 6 months, which I think is pretty darn swift for an agency regulatory review, especially a packet of this magnitude. We're excited about the proposals that we made today, but we're also excited to see the effects on childcare throughout Kansas, the data that we receive back, the health and safety data in terms of, are we going to see, more issues? Are we going to see more reports of injury, things like that? Take a look at that data, and who's to say we can't enter in again to another regulatory review to be determined amount of time and continue to update things and continue to listen to our providers.
And thank you, sir. I appreciate the answer that you've given, the response rather. I want to make clear that I'm not being adversarial or attacking you. So I appreciate you, giving the affirmative defense of your engagement that you think you've done with the legislature. I sit on a couple of committees, and we've done in response to our business community, trying to get everybody back on track after COVID, talking about the child care piece and what does that look like. In commerce, we've done several bills dealing with this and trying to address it. What I'm talking about is being collaborative. I understand that the situation is kind of adversarial inside of the administration. Hey, we want to do our thing, and then the legislature saying, hey, we're trying to make bills and be responsive as well. There's some opportunity there. I would imagine that if we all come to the table, open kimono, if you guys understand what's coming down the pike, it can influence the legislation that we're trying to do as well, versus coming into JCAR, dropping this thick of a packet, not before the full legislature, but saying this is what we're going to do for regulatory changes. That is something that we're elected to do and be monitoring on, and not in a last minute type of fashion. I think that is better to influence the legislation that we consider, craft, and pass if you actually have this stuff coming in on the front end. Not just saying, hey, we posted on public board and, shot an email. I mean, be intentional about it, because we want to partner and do this for the kids. It's not about turf wars, if you will. It's about the kids. So with that, Madam Chair, I'll yield back to the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. And, it's important for, checks and balances to operate as well regarding the legislature's duties and our role, as well as then the executive branch role, that we keep in mind checks and balances there. And so perhaps I think it would be helpful just, an overall view of, as you're looking, for instance, at the first proposed regulation, changes some definitions around family, child care, home, and things. And then later on, we're talking about toilet training and medication administration. And so if you could just highlight what the proposed policies that the regulations address are. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, I think the one that most people are interested in is KAR 28-4114, and that's our ratio table. So that's going to talk about stuff.
Let me just back you up a bit because
Correct.
I think there's at least one, you could just normal our procedure is we go through them one by one
Yeah.
in the committee, but you do have a lot today, but we do have you scheduled till 10:45. So we are ahead of time, and I think it would be educational, if nothing less, to talk about these because, as Representative Penn said, the legislature has worked on the issue of childcare a lot. We did just this session enact into statute the Office of Child Advocate, which has been a priority of both chambers of the legislature. And so we want to make sure that children are safe, and that as we're looking at laws and regulations, that we do look at them and shine some light on them. So if you could just, again, briefly what each of the regulations does. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So 28-4113, those contain our definitions. I think the ones that I would bring up, of course, 113, I got in my letters are small here, but 113I. So we've incorporated the definition of family child care home into the definitions there. So like I said, we had the licensed daycare home, the group daycare home. We're now moving to that family child care home, just one license type for our home providers. It does speak to a maximum of 12 children under 16 years of age, excuse me. And then we have the limitations for children under the age of 5. As I'm going down my list here, a lot of these you'll see general restructures and clarifications. So, we've heard from providers that, and even some of our own staff, that when they read through some of the regulations, they would like us to clarify or be more pointed in the regulations. And so we've added some wording. We've 113B. We've added the application wording to clarify applicant with the temporary permit. Little things like that that explain the process of becoming a licensed child care provider. 113O, our medical record now means the immunization record, health assessment, and medical history of a child. So new forms will be created for this. And then the medical record now encompasses all of the following. It's not one specific form, but includes all of those.
Then I think that brings us to 114 that you were talking
Sure.
about.
Yep, absolutely.
The applicant and the licensee, the application process. And the table you were talking about, maximum group size based on age.
Okay. So the wording for the application process in 114, I believe for the majority of it has stayed the same. We do add some clarifying language again when we talk about max group size for family child care homes. So each applicant with a temporary permit and each licensee shall ensure that the requirements of the subsection are met. And then we get into the tables themselves. So like I said, we currently and historically, we've had the two separate providers, consolidating those into one family child care home and looking at the tables. So I have a kind of a helpful graphic in front of me that I will refer to. One of the biggest things that we've done is we've changed that age grouping. So we don't define children's terms in homes in the same way that we do a center, but we do age groupings because it's a mixed age setting. So we've taken that middle, which used to be 0 to 18 months, and we've bumped that down to 12, and then we've opened up that middle category of care, 12 to 5, for an additional slot. So when there's one provider, you can have a max of 1 to 3 on that 0 to 12. And then we've bumped those numbers up on that 12 to 5 category by 1 each. And then our max group size has stayed the same as previously. When you're looking at when you have two providers in the home, we've again done the same thing with our age groupings, the 0 to 12, and then that 12 to 5, and then so on and so forth. And you can see that we've taken all of our max capacity in that 2 provider setting to reflect 12, which is the max group size allowed by state fire code in that type of childcare setting. We try to streamline with that so it doesn't get confusing for providers. And then again, we've 1 to 5 and the 0 to 12, and then we've bumped our allowance for slots there in that middle age grouping, the 12 to 5 by 1, and again highlighting that increase in the max capacity and group size.
So as not to confuse any providers, if these rules and regulations were to be final, when would they become effective and impact our providers across the state and parents?
Yeah. And I look at my attorney friends, but my understanding is 15 days after published in the Kansas Register. Is that correct? I mean, just following administrative rules. So I can talk about our internal workings, Senator Warren. We've worked the drafted and proposed regulations into our database and system so that we're ready to go.
So you'll be providing notices to licensed providers about the rule change if these become
Correct.
enacted.
And we've talked about some of the operational components to that, because when you have the two separate licensees in the homes and then you're consolidating them into one, we've talked about working with those to grant them the license to reflect that they're now a family child care home. So trying not to be a burden on that end as well. And I want to clarify that that's correct, Melissa. Yes. Yep.
Thank you. Is there any grace period if you're a parent and the requirements have changed and you have to find a new provider, or that's often hard to do?
Yeah. I guess I'm a little confused, Senator, because we're increasing capacity.
Increasing the capacity. We shouldn't run into that problem.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Committee, other questions? Not seeing any, then we do have one. Representative Wassinger.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm sorry, I should have asked it prior to this. With the firearms and weapons, how do you handle a police officer's home or a highway patrolman who comes in from duty? How do you handle any of that?
I might invite Melissa to come up and speak to that.
Please introduce yourself and welcome to committee.
Thank you. I'm Melissa Schoenberger. I am the section director for field and system services at KDHE within childcare licensing. And to answer your question, Representative Wassinger, we do see this all the time because we do have a lot of spouses who serve in law enforcement capacity. And as long as the weapon is on their person, they get to maintain it and keep it that way. That has never been an issue. We've never really encountered a law enforcement where they've unholstered their weapon and put it on, the kitchen table while kids are about. My experience has been that very respectful of mindful of that their spouse is running a business and follow the same protocols that they would if they were in the grocery store or any other place of business to make sure that their firearm is well maintained. And we've not really had any issues.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Representative Penn, you're next. Go ahead, Representative Wassinger.
I think for the moment I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is intriguing. And thank you for the answer there, Madam. When we're talking about, you made mention that is well maintained. Is that a gateway euphemism or anything for gun safe protocol? Is that something that you all see happening in here? We've seen quite a few amendments in the legislature over the years to include this year, asking for punitive or felony enforceable gun safe regulations. Is that something that you foresee happening here when people are inspecting the households? And as you say, if a BB gun or whatever the case might be, nunchucks or Chinese stars or whatever, is not, in your words, properly maintained, is that something that is a gateway for that type of legislation or that type of penalty?
Our regulation for the maintenance of firearms has been maintained for multiple years. And we are really, it is not really, when we look at our violation data, It is not a violation that rises up to the surface. We have really good maintenance for the regulation. Facilities are following the regulation, which is written that they have to be in locked storage. Ammunition has to be stored separately. I don't foresee any, but I would defer to our legal counsel. I do not see us changing anything within that regulation because it is just being followed. It is being maintained, and there is no rise of concern for the department based off of the compliance with the regulation.
And if I may, Madam Chair, and that gives me pause and concern because there is a preemption of gun safe practices and legislation reserved to the state house level. But this looks like it's a back door. Should someone be inspected, as the previous conferee said, these are regulations that the agency can approve, promulgate, and enforce without the legislature's eye on it. So it sounds to me like that's an opportunity to push gun safe regulations without having it come through and having it in contravention to current state law. And I had another question since he's coming back up, Madam Chair, going back to 113, we were talking about all of the sections in here talking about sanitizing with EPA regulated food safe and all of those different changes in the regulation. When it goes back to the EPA, my question would be, is EPA registered? EPA registered. Is that allowing, I guess, is this part of the compliance piece that you said that we have to do with DC? Is it forcing those who can't afford any of those types of chemicals or the approved list of things? Does it put them out of the market for providing child care rather, because they can't do what the EPA is doing, jumping through their hoops? Is that something necessarily that we want to do, or do we want to have it KDHE, Kansas approved versus DC?
Thank you, Representative Penn. I would say we're not, childcare licensing is not the expert in sanitizing or disinfecting. And often what we hear with regulation, kind of the point of clarifying, is if we say clean with a substance, the question we get is, well, what substance? And so I think trying to be clear, an EPA list would be easy to access for things that you can go buy at your local grocery store to properly sanitize or disinfect. And then I think similarly to the idea of keeping firearms and ammunition out of the reach of children, it's the same concept with medication. Things that can be harmful for the children, keep out of their reach for the safety of the kiddos. Melissa, do you have anything to add to the EPA?
I would just add that those the clarity and the definitions are just that. They provide clarity to the actual provider. We have to be mindful that we are regulating a business that has a lot of fluids, lack of term when we're dealing with children, and really trying to make sure that we are keeping everybody safe because we are under the public health realm, and ensuring that we're not using products that have not been tested, have not really properly killed germs as we need to. So I don't see it as a barrier, but as some clarity to a provider, just as Derek said. We do get asked lots of questions. Well, what does that look like? Can you just give me a list? So I don't see it again as a barrier. I think it's the department being helpful and clear to providers and facilities to give an understanding of how to keep kiddos safe in childcare environments.
And Madam Chair, I definitely cede that ground to you that, the focus is on the safety of the children. I understand that. But I would, Madam Chair, ask that they go and talk to their legal about that contention, that tension that you have with the gun safe law here in the state versus the enforcement of your regulatory guidance that you have. And if it runs outside of the law, I would imagine that that's a constitutional issue that we have right now between the legislature and the executive. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. If you'll go ahead and proceed then, if there aren't any further questions, which I don't see any. Thank you.
I believe my packet is 68 pages, so I'm just sorting through here all of the definition changes and clarity that we've tried to offer providers. and looking for the ones to highlight for you all that have either significant changes or.
Well, so 114A is regarding professional training. Is the state proposing more training, more hours for our providers, or just different content?
Yeah, so, excuse me. So I know we're stuck at 6th. I'm just trying to find the correct page here.
16 hours.
There we go. Yes, thank you.
So we're keeping the current 16.
Yep, we're keeping the current 16. We do have to come up to par for the federal requirements of CPR training. So we do have to require CPR training for all childcare providers across the state, as well as medication administration training. And something, again, I might ask Melissa or Allison to come up and speak to the qualifications piece. This was something that we worked through very closely and with a lot of intent and purpose and feedback directly from the providers, because there is that fine line between honoring their experience and having that foundational entry. Allison, would you be willing to come up and speak a little bit to qualifications?
I don't think we have any questions at this
Okay.
time, but if we do,
Keeping it-
thank you for the opportunity. And
Yes.
I will say the legislature looked at not exactly CPR this session, but requirement that schools have a cardiac emergency response plan in place. So that's something that's been the work of both chambers of the legislature, and looks like it's impacting our child care providers as well. So this new requirement this year. And if there aren't any other questions about 114A, I propose we move to the next.
Okay.
Looks like 115 talks about the facility, the physical facility itself, and
Yeah, so in 115 we've done a little bit of cleanup. There's some small grammar updates. 115C11, 2.5 to 2.5 to just update that grammar. We have added the prohibition of common towels on 115C16. So we just a public health background, trying to avoid spreading germs, as we would call it, in our childcare settings, but bacteria and other things that may lead to health and safety issues for other children. We did add in 115C17 some language around, and this is really meant to prevent exposure to lead. So it reads, has interior and exterior surfaces of the facility that are free from peeling, chipping, cracking, scaling, and loose paint. You could have children that touch or potentially ingest. And we all know the risk that lead exposure can lead to for specifically for children. Moving down a little bit,
we do have a question,
Yeah.
Representative Min.
Thank you. And what was the number for that?
That one is going to be 28.4, 115C17.
It's on page 3 of Regulation 115. Subsection 16 is no common towels, and section 17 is, yes, Representative Wynn.
So have you ever considered having the facilities tested for lead?
Yeah, there's actually been some
provision in here.
It is not. We don't require it by regulation or anything like that. There has been some funding available from the federal government that has come down through KDHE. I would have to have our other programs speak to that, but there has been funding that has been made available for both our public schools, education and general education settings, which is childcare, and then childcare settings as well. That funding's been around for several years. There is some available currently too.
Comes and it goes.
Correct. Yeah, and so in that funding's been available to both test for lead and also provide some funds for potential remediation or correction of the issues, which can get quite costly. And obviously, we see, you would see your lead issues in older homes, older facilities, and that sort of thing.
So I guess that's the real question. If if you find there to be peeling and chipping, what is available for the provider to replace the windows and do all that?
And I think that just speaks to our general approach when there's an issue in a facility, um, regulatory issue that we find, we try to be helpful to either come up to compliance or give them the tools and resources they need to meet that. There's been health and safety grant funds that's been available for the last several years to help providers come up to compliance with things. So in this instance, Representative, excuse me, if somebody was to have this issue with, the peeling paint or anything like that, we would want our staff licensing specialists to be able to make those connections to the resources that are available. And I think we'll work internally in the program, whether that's an internal KDHE connection or a connection to their local community. There's people and organizations, both at the public and private levels, that are doing some of this work.
While the work is being scheduled, what happens to the facility? What happens with the parents and the kids who are there while we're waiting for the remediation to happen? Does the facility have to close? And then I guess is the question, does the facility close? What happens?
No, closures typically last resort. We typically give grace periods for things like this to work through the issues, to give them a chance and an opportunity to come up with compliance. I again would probably invite Melissa to come back up, because I think this speaks to some of the larger things that she might see out in the field in terms of if a provider has issues. It could be the paint issues. It could be a number of structural, another structural issue too. Talk about our approach on that, Melissa.
If you'll identify yourself again, that'd be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Melissa Schoenberger, KDHE Childcare Licensing. To answer your question, Derek is very much right, spot on with the transparency of the department. Closure is really a last resort for any facility that is open. Our goal is to work with them, provide them resources. And what we would accept in the interim in our department's world would be a plan of correction. To mitigate if there was paint peeling on the outside, to mitigate exposure to children. So we're going to play in a different area of the home. We're going to go into this. So, we all have been exposed to young children. They're very curious. They like to peel things. They like to put things in their mouth that are not really as needed or as appropriate. The same if there was an issue in the home. We would look at use of their space and look at, do we really need to use this area? How do we just continue to mitigate? But the department works really hard for closure as the last resort. We find these issues not just with our lead paints, but maybe if there's a fire issue. The same with our partners at the Office of Fire Marshal. And we really try to look and work with facilities to figure out the best plan forward to keep kids safe and keep everybody operational. Again, as a last resort, would we ever look towards closure as we're trying to connect local resources? And let this issue with lead paints, I have been with the department for over 18 years working in the child care licensing program. And I can say with confidence that we've never closed a facility due to this particular issue.
Is there an opportunity for a home to be inspected and certified as lead free so that if there's interior surfaces that are chipping, that might take care of the concern of the department that it might be lead-based paint?
As I can't direct the funds of other programs, and when those are available and what they would cost to the facility, I would want to really be able to work within our leadership at KDHE and look at local resources before I can say with confidence and give you a definitive answer on that.
Representative Penn.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, ma'am, for that question. To Representative Wynn's point, it runs my hackles up, as we were saying with Mr. Derek before. This is about the kids and their safety, right? And me, I'm a small government type of guy. However, comma, if, like we said before, if we're trying to work in this collaborative space, if we can, for sake of the children, to Representative Wynn's point, if you find a home that has this chipping and things of that nature, and they're under a certain age of home, if you will, so it's more of a probability or propensity that they might have lead in the paint or whatever the case. I got little kids; they lick everything. Trust me, it's crazy. So my hackles go up about that. If we're going to mandate, as I said before, in other committees, different changes in the childcare space, maybe some money needs to be aligned for that mitigation remediation. I'm old Army as well, so we do this thing called trust but verify. So I like what you said about, hey, listen, we want to see what your mitigation plan is going to be, but enforce that. And if dollars are added against that, Madam Chair, I guess it's a long way of saying I would love to see from the department, uh, what are those list of resources down there? How much do they have? What does that landscape look like? How can they access it? Is it efficient, both for the provider coming into that space? Do you have the right structures and checks in there? And is there more needed to ease the accessibility of remediation or mitigation for that space for those kids? Because if we're going to, put a mandate out that we're going to change what the childcare space looks like, maybe there needs to be some money attached to that legislation. This is why I was saying, come in open kimono, let us know what's going on so that we can make stuff that makes sense, do something that does something the right way. So, Madam Chair, I don't know how to make that request known and have them come back and inform us of that so that we can make better legislation, but I would be very much interested. Thank you.
Thank you, and we've taken note of that.
Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I appreciate the addition of this, and I certainly understand that having rental facilities and filling out the forms, every time for the new tenants to make sure that they understand that. But I think we would also not want children eating paint that didn't have lead in it. I think ingesting any kind of, as you mentioned, materials that are not appropriate. So my guess is that this is just there to help people understand that that shouldn't be happening. And it is fairly easy to solve by either covering up the surface or repainting. So I think this is appropriate.
Thank you.
All right, we're ready to proceed then.
I'm going to work through the larger packet. I think that'll be easier. It's my first JCAR experience, so I appreciate you guys being
Just have one.
flexible for me.
So I'll help you out a little bit along the way. So
Yeah.
116 looks like daily care of children, and it mostly looks like eliminating hand washing kind of instructions, requirements, and a lot about bottles, both formula and breast milk, and how that's to be handled and stored.
Yes, correct. Yep. So looking down to 116, what I have here is going to be D1. Well, you're going to get into the smaller digits there, starting on 116 D1. So we do speak a lot to bottles and breastfeeding accommodations as well. So this is another area where we worked closely with partners. We worked with some Kansas Breastfeeding Coalition was able to give us some feedback on some of this to make sure that it met current best guidelines and practices. So you'll see modernizing some formula practices and then moving it into a list of requirements so that that is clear and concise for our providers. And then also looking down to 116.1D4, I believe that 5, excuse me, that is. And that's the one that speaks to accommodations shall be provided that enable the child's parent to breastfeed their child. So I'm sure you all have seen this in various settings, whether it's childcare, a healthcare setting, or a business for that matter, is having accommodations for breastfeeding for that parent. So if a mom or a parent wants to come into a facility and breastfeed their child, if they're able to do so, that the provider gives them the accommodations to make that possible. lot of restructuring based off of those movements throughout the rest of 116. We do add a catering section. This is something that I started last February, by the way, February of 23. So when I say during my time, it's a year and a few months. But during my time, I've seen the use of caterers grow in some, especially in our childcare centers. Some are catering foods in, and so we've added some language around that. For food safety, and obviously we want to avoid things like food poisoning, um, things of that nature, and following safe food practices. So 116A, B1, we've added a requirement for a written safe sleep plan. This is definitely a health and safety component of our child care licensing uh, program, is ensuring that our infants are, and our providers are practicing, safe sleep for our infants. We've seen some very sad situations based off of that sort of thing, and we really want to have our providers in regulation have a written safe sleep plan, not only for their sake, but for parents' sake as well. They can ask about that, and then we have it written down for our licensing specialists to refer to.
We do have a question, Representative Wassinger.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Why is swaddling not permitted? Can you give me a good background on that, please?
Sure. And I'll invite Melissa up again to speak to swaddling, because I believe there's various situations where it may be allowed, is what I want to say. Based off of nope. Okay, we won't do that. Swaddling in general, we found based off of best practice in childcare facilities could be a safe sleep issue. But I'll let Melissa speak to that.
Thank you, Melissa Schoenberger, Childcare Licensing. To answer your question, Representative Wassinger, with the updated guidelines with safe sleep practices, swaddling is a newborn activity, and we see most of our children coming into care at around 3 months of age. And swaddling is not recommended due to the fact, again, newborn activity. There's always the probability of error on the provider. When you look at best practice literature, if you don't swaddle appropriately, you could have hip dysplasia of infants. There's also some incidents where infants who do roll over wouldn't be able, if they did move out of their back position, would be then stuck in a position because of the swaddle. So alternatives to swaddling, we do really promote, as does the Kids Network in Kansas, which is our SIDS network, sleep sacks, which provide some of the same comfort, some of that same sort of, just that warm level that infants may require, but without the concern of any of those safe sleep practices that would be considered to put the child potentially at harm. So this is not a new stance of the department, due to the American Academy of Pediatrics recommendations. We have been very much promoting this as a non-safe sleep practice. But with the regulation process, we had an opportunity to put it in writing. So we really don't see it as an issue, because so many within the regulated community really want to follow safe sleep practices, because our goal is always 0 deaths, and any little outside of the norm of what is recommended, everybody is really willing to follow. So we have been this has been a stance and a consultation for years with our regulated facilities. So the actual wording of swaddling is not new into the regulated space.
Thank you, Senator Tyson.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you for being here. It's deja vu. Over a few years ago, I had made a statement with you guys on rules and regs. You are very aggressive and have put a lot of local daycares um, babysitting facilities out of business, and look where we're at in the state with the crisis. Don't you think that these professionals would be able to make the best judgment within these parameters instead of bureaucrats trying to make a blanket statewide decision that impacts these facilities and these children?
So safe sleep practices and in general regulations, consumer protection piece. So this is ease of mind for the parents as well. Of course, we trust our providers as being experts in the field. Um, absolutely. The data would say that we have the highest, licensed childcare capacity since we began recording that metric in 2008. So we're at an all-time high in terms of licensed slots around the state. Our piece is to protect the children. Safe sleep is a very clear part of that. As far as the health and safety requirements go, I understand the term aggressive. I would say passionate.
Well, there might be capacity, but if there's willingness of providers to engage in the business of providing childcare, it might be challenging, to Senator Tyson's point. Did you have a follow-up, Senator?
Thank you, Chairman. I do, and the reason the licensing is increased is because it's mandatory. You can only have so many children without coming under rules and regulations. I happened to be out in central Kansas and was talking to a daycare facility, and they expressed concerns. They've been in business for over almost 30 years. Many of my family members have gone to them, and it is to the point where they don't know if they can continue. And it's the only daycare in that town. And you guys are about to put them out because of all the rules and regulations. And 30 years of success. In fact, they've got second generation children going to this facility. And she asked me when I was there, she said, Karen, what can you do? What can you do to help us out? And here I have to listen to you guys over regulating again. I'm not going to pick and choose which ones, but I watched this happen a few years ago. You are putting in, there are rules and regulations that can't be met by kindergartens or by parents in homes, but you expect daycare facilities to meet these guidelines or these laws. They have the rule of law. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a comment more than a question, and do apologize because if you have all this time, you can read all the words in between that aren't underlined or changed. And so just when we're talking, this is 28-4-116, page 6. When you're talking about what breakfast and lunch and snacks shall include, we talk about meat or a meat alternative, and I think that wording may strike people differently now that we have all the substitutes for meat. So I'm hoping that this means meat or eggs or meat or peanut butter, make perhaps a protein rather than necessarily a meat substitute. So that's just a comment, and I'll let you get on.
Another quick comment. So back to 116A. So the sleeping crib or playpen shall not have a flat sheet either. So the department is suggesting sleeping on the rubber plastic mattress. Is that the proposal? What's that mean? Oh, I'm sorry. So we can have a fitted sheet, but not a flat sheet. Okay, got it. So any other questions about 116A? Not seeing any, then we'll move on to 117.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So 117, healthcare requirements for children under 16 years of age. We've changed that title, healthcare requirements for children under 16 years of age and record keeping. So including the record keeping in this regulation. We've added physician assistant as a professional able to conduct those health assessments. That's just a modernization piece. And then we do allow that child's health assessment to be conducted within 12 months before initial enrollment. So, insurances we know often allow one well child visit per year, and this increases in flexibility increases flexibility, and reduces burden on families. We also allow a 60-day window for children to submit the health assessment and immunization records after their first day of care. It doesn't apply to the medical history form, which has to be on file prior to the child's first day for health and safety purpose. But this was actually an existing policy exception, so we've just incorporated this into regulation. It does allow displaced children to not be singled out, and then provides greater flexibility for families. And we are allowing these to be stored electronically. Again, just another modernization piece to 117.
Okay, 118.
118, medication administration and reporting suspected child abuse or neglect. This is where we've removed medication administration from the title and then moved it to another regulation, 28.4.132. It does apply to centers and preschools as well, and fits better in general regulations, that other piece. I'm gonna flood this table with papers. So moving on to our general regulations, we'll go to 28.4.122. Those are general regulations for family daycare homes and child care facilities. We've changed the title to requirements and definitions for general regulations. We've added 28.4.133 to the group of general regs. That's the reporting of critical incidents. We created and implemented recently. Added a large list of defined terms which apply to the general regulations. So that includes that new defined term, which includes the family child care home, the child care center, and preschool. Residential centers and group boarding homes, those are not included in that definition, but still applies to general regulations. In 123, we talk a little bit about parental access to child care facilities. And this, we've added requirements around video camera usage within facilities and just had some modernization pieces there. I'm a parent. I know I use a camera for my two little girls, to make sure that they're safe when they're sleeping. And some providers may choose to do that as well. So we just talk about parental access to those videos and recordings. 124, parental admission for children to go off premises. So the residential centers and group boarding homes, they are exempt from this regulation. The emergency medical treatment form and medical record should be accessible during off-premises trips or activities. Again, another health and safety purpose regulation. So increasing safety and preparation if there is a medical emergency while a child is off of their normal premise. And then requiring written permission from a parent or legal guardian when the child bikes or walks without adult supervision. Again, just another piece of increasing safety.
Going back to 123 real quickly, you've added new rules and regulations regarding the use of video cameras at facilities. Mm-hmm. And were those based on other states, what they do, or where did this arrive from?
As I recall our discussion, again, we just knew that some facilities had been utilizing this. We wanted to make sure that we, allowed parents the proper access to those. So we talk about providing remote visual access to parents and legal guardians, informing the parents that video cameras may be used to monitor their children. And that I think the most important piece is it doesn't replace any supervision items or anything. On this specific one, and I'm looking at Alice, and I don't recall the language that we compared to other states. So
does it come from other states, or we've just made our own? It doesn't talk about whether it shall be recorded or not, or how long it's kept, or where it may be disseminated or anything like that. Is that covered elsewhere, or is it prohibited or allowed?
I don't see any language around length of time. So no, I don't believe that's in there. We do talk about, obviously, the department secretary's designee having access to those if needed. But there's no.
So we're talking then about recording and some retention for some length of time, but we don't know what it is.
I think that may be captured in the notice to parents that it's taking place. Do you have something to add? Go ahead, Melissa.
Yes. Again, Melissa Schoenberger. We don't have a retention time, and we don't monitor that right now. So many times we do. Why this is a very important regulation to have in place is we do conduct complaint investigations, which are driven a lot by parental concerns about the facility. And what we've learned through this process and through lots of data that we have, parents aren't always not always aware that there's even a video camera, or that there's something that has happened at the facility that they can request to go look at. We just want to know, again, this is very much a parental driven component of parents being notified that our child is being recorded during the day. And if there is an incident that is captured on video, then we would like to be able to see that, and not just ourselves. Sometimes law enforcement requested that, or our partners at Department for Children and Families if there's an abuse neglect investigation. But we do not penalize a
No
facility.
requirement.
Yeah, we don't penalize if they don't retain it.
Thank you. And we are going to run short on time here. So I think rather than continue as we have, we can take a look at the economic impact statement, and you'll see there's a listing there of each of the sections and kind of a highlight of what they do at the back of your packet. Because we're going to get behind time if we continue to go through each. So just want to pause for a moment and ask the committee to review that list. And if we have questions about specific regulations, we can ask. So we'll pause for just a moment. Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'm looked briefly over that list at the end, but also at the beginning, I really appreciated the very descriptive response to business requirements for licensees and how much they might cost based on $13.71 an hour. So I think that was very carefully laid out and helps us understand this impact. So
I'll just make a general comment for the proceedings here in this committee that it's often helpful if our conferees come prepared to give a brief summary of each of the regulations that are going to be before the committee, because each of these has a real life impact for Kansans and for Kansas businesses and families. And it's important that the legislature have full opportunity to discuss those. And there's a lot here we didn't cover. There's a lot of substance here that perhaps, as Representative Penn has stated, Senator Tyson has as well, a lot of regulations here with a lot of questions you've seen from the legislature. So I'm glad that we stopped and we took a moment to go through these. It just shows you that perhaps the policymakers should be more involved at the beginning of this process rather than at this point. And these are perhaps some policy questions that should be decided by the policymakers, the legislature. So I think Representative Wassinger had a comment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, kind of an overall comment. Did you say you have more than 400 people licensed to do daycare? Did I hear that correctly?
We have approximately 4,500 licensed childcare facilities. We don't license the individual, but the facility.
So if I had a in-home daycare, that would just be considered a facility, correct?
The definition, yeah. The regulatory definition of facility, yes, ma'am.
And is that number higher or lower? Where is that gone? I mean, how many have we lost? A bunch from the last few years? Have we gained a whole bunch of childcare providers or facilities?
It depends on in what setting you're talking about. The trends in Kansas are really following the national trend, which is we're seeing our centers grow in number and our homes perhaps not. I know there's been some questions on feedback. We do actually do an exit survey as well as Childcare Aware when a provider forfeits their licensure, and we ask them if they're willing to provide their reason for closure. We very rarely hear about regulation being a barrier. I would love to talk to those folks that do say that. We want that feedback, but typically our feedback is economic in nature. Our homes have decreased, our centers have increased. The reason for the regulatory changes is to try to support our home providers and make that more incentivized to be a family child care home.
May I? This is not the sum total of all of your regulations for child care facilities. This is onerous. I mean, I have to agree with the senator, because you can't tell me you're not passing legislation in some of these. You're changing lives. We're having problems with infants being able to be taken care of. All these people are scrambling. They're scrambling where I live, and I know it's happening all over. And if people don't tell you it's the regulations, they're lying. How does anyone follow every single one? How does everyone know every single one? Do you have a handbook that you give them so they don't have to read through a bunch of regulations? We just nationally saw a law produced via regulation, and I see it today too. I absolutely expect all of the agencies to go back to the legislature and ask them to put some things in statute that you believe are necessary before you start just passing regulations left and right. I am deeply grateful for everyone who does childcare. I'm thankful. But as the senator said, I think I run a pretty clean house. I raised 4 kids, didn't kill a single one of them. Swaddled them when they were babies, never had a problem. I watch my grandkids when I'm home. I couldn't begin to start doing all this, and I think you're making this profession get into this circle. And if you think only $100,000 is $180,000 you said would be the economic impact for some. I think there are a lot more, and I don't think you've looked into that. I don't think you realize the complaints that I get every time I go somewhere. Help us with childcare. Did you see what they're making us do now? I'm going to close my facility. I can't do this. I can't. You're so busy worrying about what you're doing with kids that you're not even present with the kids mentally. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Other questions or comments? Representative Penn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Forgive me for stepping out for a little bit. I wanted to go back. I think it was back in, there we are. This is on page 3 of 28, TAC 4, TAC 114 alpha, page 3, subparagraph, where am I at? It says section 4B, Roman numeral 3. It says approaches to learning on that bullet. What does that mean exactly?
So thank you, Representative Penn. We have got question about curriculum for our child care providers. We don't require curriculum or anything like that. Melissa, would you be willing again to speak to the learning piece as well? You said 114, Representative, sorry.
That's correct, sir. 114A, page 3. It's under what used to be paragraph 4. I think this now is 3, Bravo, Roman numeral 3. It says approaches to learning. And I guess my question is more along the lines, and I think Derek was onto it. What is the curriculum that you're trying to distribute, enforce? What guidelines does it have with it that we're putting into home child care centers? What's the expectation there?
Okay, Melissa Schoenberger, Child Care Licensing. Representative Penn, to answer your question, we do not have a set curriculum for home providers. I myself have surveyed, and I like to say I grew up in the field, and so I've spent a lot of time with providers giving guidance, asking in this exact question, and I'll cross-reference to 116, which is our activities, which speak to math, reading, all of those really good things. But what we really consult, coach, and provide opportunities for providers is it's low cost to no cost. It's really not that complicated. When you're talking about math, I'm going to pick little Susie to help me with lunch today, and we're going to count how many of our friends we have, and then we're going to set that many plates, and then we're going to simply read to children. And then when you're outside, everything is an experiment. So we're going to look at how plants grow. We're going to, I have some facilities who plant a garden, and get some of those science components in there. So it is not a set curriculum. We look for natural opportunities for enrichment of children and really provide, again, good guidance. The department gives a minimum threshold, and then we have great partners throughout the state with our infant toddler specialist network, our childcare aware, all of those who can add those additional enrichment. But we don't give, again, a threshold. We don't give a requirement for curriculum. We just really want to have natural opportunities for children to learn. Our goal is to make sure children aren't just sit in front of a TV all day, but have those really good interactions at low cost to no cost.
Amen. And thank you, Madam Chair, if I may. And I appreciate that answer. Saw the pursuit of happiness, so I know what you're getting at right there, right? Madam Chair, I guess my question, and even if you get the 116, the reason that I asked that question is to the Vice Chair's point, if you're going to increase regulatory guidance or expectations on all of these different individuals at the home level, I wouldn't want to see that they have an expectation to promulgate some type of curriculum that's in coordination with things that they might not be able or might not be supportive of. When we're talking about different types of topics that we see in our public school system or at the college level, and that there's an expectation for them to start, indoctrinating kids at the home level, at the preschool level, or wherever they are in this space according to your age categories. Because and if they run afoul of that, then they can lose their license because they have not, danced to the right tune. That's what I'm trying to get at.
And if I could answer to that, that would be a very extreme circumstance. Again, we have never removed a license because nobody isn't reading to children. It's a consultation. It's a review. It's a minimal expectation. Those are not in 116. That is not a new regulation. That's been a standard for almost 12 years. And so we would not be in this particular packet. We're not imposing anything additional to a provider that has not already been in their landscape and in their space.
You talked about interactions at low cost or no cost. This is a lot of regulation about curriculum. Is there opportunity for free play for kids?
Of course, we require that children get taken outdoors daily, and we want kids to run. There is free play can be easily associated with science and math and reading, and learning those.
That's not
those
truly then
skills.
just free play and kids self-directed kid activities, completely self-directed. Is that proposed in the rules and regulations, or is it always adult directed?
I would
Certainly
agree to
supervised,
disagree
but
at this with you in that assumption. Children are
that's
amazing.
why I'm asking.
Right. Yes. So they can do free play, but they are learning skills. If I'm playing dress up with a doll and I'm playing mom, I am learning, skills that go to literacy and dressing my dolls are cutting and all of the, using scissors or coloring. Those are all fine motor, large motor, literacy. So even free play is an opportunity for a child to learn. And it doesn't always have to be adult directed. You are correct.
Of course it is. So there's no disagreement that free play has immense value, and child driven free play as well has immense value. And that's how we learn a lot of social skills and other things. So just was asking whether there was opportunity in the regulations proposed by the department for children to free choose, free play, and have some discretion in what they do.
Correct, Madam Chair. That's already embedded in regulation because these are not new. And so those are things that we see all the time that children do just independently.
Of course, thank you. If we don't have any other questions or comments from the committee, I'm not seeing any. So then we will thank the Department of Health and Environment for their presentation today and for answering our questions. Appreciate it. We will take just a 2-minute break. We've been at it a while, just a 2-minute break to keep us on schedule to give our revisers and staff a break for just a moment as well. Thank you. Thank you for that short recess. We are now ready to hear from the Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks, Dan Riley, Chief Counsel, who is participating via WebEx. Please introduce yourself and welcome to committee.
Good morning, Madam Chair. I am Dan Riley and I'm Chief Counsel with the Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks. Thank you for allowing me to participate remotely today. We've got a commission meeting in Salina that begins at noon, so that's where I am. We have 4 regulations on the agenda today, and they're all related. They're all involving aquatic invasive species, and it's a pretty simple change that we're making in these regs. Aquatic invasive is a new terminology. Historically, these species, whether they be plant or animal species that are detrimental to aquatic wildlife habitats, have been called nuisance species, and invasive is the new technology, and that's the change that we're making in these 4 regulations, basically reflecting that. The 4 that we have on the agenda are KAR 115.7-9. This is a regulation that involves weigh-in of black bass fishing tournaments, and we are simply changing the language in there to reflect the new terminology of aquatic invasive species and the requirements for black bass fishing tournaments. And would you like me to wait until I've talked about all 4 to ask for questions, or would you like me to stop after each one?
Please go ahead and go through, and then if we have questions along the way, the committee member will signify they have a question. So please proceed.
All right, thank you. The next one on the list today is KAR 115.7-10. This is a regulation that deals with special provisions related to fishing. And again, the only change here is in that particular terminology that changes nuisance species to invasive species. The next one on the list is KAR 115.17-3. This is a regulation that sets out the terms and conditions for a commercial fish bait permit. And in this particular regulation, the change includes a requirement that anyone that makes application for a commercial fish bait permit also complete a new online examination for certification that we have in the invasive species. And the 4th one that we have today is an add-on regulation that was not ready at the time of the original agenda, but it's 115.7-3, and it's now been through the process. And this is a regulation that deals with the taking and use of bait fish or minnows that makes the same terminology change for anybody who's out capturing their own bait fish or minnows, that they now are put on notice of the invasive species, and the same change, like I say, made to change that terminology from the nuisance species to invasive. And those are basically the changes in those 4 regulations. Pretty simple and pretty straightforward.
Thank you. I have a question. Invasive is defined somewhere in the regulations?
Yes, it is. I don't have it in front of me because I just brought my stack from here, but yes, and I can get that specific reference to you when I get back in Topeka, if that's okay, but yes.
If you could get that definition provided to the
Absolutely.
committee, that would be helpful. Thank you. Representative Penn, and then Wassinger.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sir, thank you for your testimony today. Just a quick question about the chronology of the terms, if you will. If a species, suppose it's a lungfish, let's just say that, is somewhere and that is already present, it's not invading, but if it's already present and it blossoms, it becomes a nuisance. It's not necessarily something that's being introduced new to the environment, so it's not an invasive. Does the changes that you have allow for that type of nuance, or is that something that's outside the scope?
Well, yeah, by definition, the nuisance and now invasive species are not native to Kansas. These are species that are introduced from someplace. So a native species could not be in that category. But anything that has been defined as one of those types of species that is detrimental to the habitat is a candidate for that, whether it be a animal species or a plant species. This is kind of, and this reminds me a lot of the noxious weed definition process. I've got an ag background, and the terminology and the methodology in terms of identifying those species that are harmful and are basically on the list to be prevented or eliminated is a pretty similar process.
Thank you, Representative Wassinger.
Thank you, Madam Chair. What, how long is the test? I mean, not the test, the certification that you have to take in order to get a license. How long? What does that entail? I should say.
It's less than 10 minutes. I took it the other day when I was preparing for this meeting today and passed it. It's pretty straightforward. It's kind of a common sense examination that just makes sure that you understand the basics in terms of the invasive species. And I would say probably 5 minutes if you're not interrupted. So it's very short, straightforward, but it just makes sure that those people that are going to be in the business of dealing with bait fish and other types of bait specimens are aware of the necessary precautions so that we don't have any more situations that result in the kind of damage that some of the invasive species have. Probably the invasive species that everyone has heard and talked more about than anything else are either the zebra mussels, which cause all kinds of problems in intake pipes and that type of structure in the water bodies where they're present, or the invasive carp species that everybody's seen the videos flying up out of the water and injuring somebody in a boat because they're big and they have a tendency to jump when they're startled by loud noises. And those are two kind of poster child examples of invasive species that we're dealing with now.
Thank you. Other questions? Not seeing any, then thank you very much for your testimony today and for answering questions. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Next, we will hear from the Kansas State Board of Cosmetology, Benjamin Foster, Executive Director. Please introduce yourself and welcome to committee.
Madam Chairman and the committee, thank you for allowing me to come before you. I am new. I have only been here about 6 months, so I've never appeared before your committee before. I'm not sure how everything works, but I'm going forward with that. Do you have documentation on? Okay, so you have. I brought it otherwise, just in case.
Well, thank you. That's being extra prepared for a committee for your first time. So smart thinking. Thank you.
We have 3 regulations before you, and it's mostly clerical. We're changing some wording to more clearly reflect what's going on in the professions today, like changing infection control and terms like that. On our document for the public hearing, there's a summary, and I'm going to use that for the summary before you today, if you want to follow along. KR 69-15-6, application completion and deadline. We're changing some wording in there just once again to clean it up and make it more reflective. We are also changing the initial licensure date from your birth month or birth date to make it consistent through all of our regulations. And most regulatory boards use that system. That's what we intend to do there. 69-15-7, examinations for cosmetic tattoo artists and body piercers. Currently, we test a written exam and we have a practical exam that's hands-on. I think part of this goes back to COVID, where people were doing written tests, and we're going forward with that and suggesting that what was the practical may now be written. And that's just consistent with everything else that we do. And that's what's in there. And once again, that's where we changed sanitation to infection control. That was one of the big other things listed there. Renewal of practitioner licenses. In addition to updating language, we're saying in that section, the last part of that section required that after your license had been expired for 3 years, you had to take the test again. And we're proposing to strike that. Those are the changes that we're putting forward in this at this time.
Thank you. Committee, are there questions? Representative Penn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sir, thank you for coming here today, and welcome on your maiden voyage. We'll try to not rough you up too much. It's all right. Does barbering fall under cosmetology?
No, it doesn't.
It does not. So these licensure
Board of
renewals
Cosmetology licenses cosmetology, manicurists, estheticians, aesthetics, tanning, tattooing, cosmetic tattooing, and piercing, body piercing.
And Madam Chair, if I may, the renewal of practitioner licenses, what's the impact of that? Did you hear from your members that they wanted that change? What's the impact of that change necessarily?
This is one of those things that I've been here since July 17th of last year. I don't know why that change was put in there. I'm simply going forward with what was put out there.
Thank you. Committee, other questions? Not seeing any, then congratulations on concluding your first appearance, but you had another comment, sir?
Something Representative Wassinger was saying to someone earlier that I really liked. As I said, I inherited this. I'm not real thrilled with our regulations, and working with this committee, other people, I've heard from Senator Tyson, we've conversed. I really want to make changes to our regulations to make them easier to be understood. We can't expect people to follow our regulations if you can't read and understand our regulations. You shouldn't need a lawyer to tell you what the board is telling you. And that's one of the things that I want to do.
Thank you. Senator Tyson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And I'll take a minute to thank you for going over and above. I had a constituent move into the area from California, and it was extremely difficult to get them licensing in Kansas, and you did help out greatly on that issue. Thank you.
It's great to hear from a department or an agency that, these rules and regulations are made for Kansans, to be used by Kansans, to be protecting Kansas public health and safety. And so it's imperative that they not be, first of all, overly burdensome or onerous, and second, that they be understood by the public. So thank you for your outlook on that. It's nice that you shared that and refreshing to hear. Appreciate that. So thank you very much again for your testimony today. And we have a quick question from Representative Wassinger.
Thank you, Madam Chair. What are it's not in this, but what are the requirements for cosmetology school to teach infection control and all their sanitation? How much time is spent within the year or so that I'm in cosmetology school?
There is a stated amount in our regulations and statute. I can't tell you what that percentage is offhand. With me as my licensing director and my assistant, do either of you know offhand? But yeah, there is a stated time in there, or a stated percentage in the curriculum requirements in terms of infection control.
Okay, but somewhere in your regulations, you have the amount of time that everyone has.
Yes.
So would you say it's 20% of the the class for the year, or would it be you just do it every single day? I'd like some answers to that, if you would, because it occurs to me that it's very vague as to how much is being taught in these cosmetology schools about infection control.
I have been in one cosmetology school, and maybe my assistant can speak to that also, because he is a former inspector with the board. But the one that I've been in, they're teaching this every day. You know, they're telling the students, you've got to clean the implements, you've got to clean the sinks. It's an everyday thing as part of the school. But yes, there is a stated amount. My guess, and it's purely a guess, is it's probably at least 20% of the makeup, but it is stated somewhere. But yet in the schools every day, they're talking about that, because they're telling them that if you get inspected and one of our inspectors come in, you know, you can't have reused tools. You've got to disinfect the combs. Pedicures, you've got to disinfect that bowl. You've got to get all of the material out of the bowl. And if you don't do that, you will be cited by the board and it will affect your licensure. So yeah, they are drilling that into their heads every day.
All right, thank you.
Yes, Ms. Moyer from our revisor's office.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was able to find the answer. It's in KAR 6915-2 in the approved course of study. This is related to the tattoo, body piercing, and permanent cosmetics. So it's not specifically cosmetology, but it requires the safety, sanitation, sterilization, and bloodborne pathogens make up 15% of the total hours.
Thank you.
And thank you, Madam Chair.
Other questions or comments? Okay, now again, thank you for the completion of your testimony and your maiden voyage, as Representative Fenn called it. But thank you for appearing and for your testimony and your answering the questions today.
Thank you.
Thank you. And next we will hear from the Department of Administration, Nancy Ruoff, Director of Accounts and Reports. Please introduce yourself and welcome to committee. Make sure your microphone is on, and there we go. Start over, please. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Nancy Ruoff. I'm the Director of the Office of Accounts and Reports with the Department of Administration. Madam Chair, members of the committee, I'm privileged to be here today. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you and to testify or provide testimony on KAR 1-16-21, which is related to registration and membership fees. This KAR spells out regulations for reimbursement of professional license registration fees, as well as reimbursement for membership in professional organizations that have a business purpose that serves the benefit of the state agency. This regulation was last amended in 1976, and it was identified as an opportunity for improvement when we completed the regulation review. D of A proposed amending this regulation to allow for state employees to hold memberships in their name if the organization does not allow for the membership to be held in the name of the state agency. It also allows reimbursement of fees that are associated with those memberships. Prior to the amendment, the regulation language did not include the opportunity for reimbursement and stated that membership in the organizations must be in the name of the state agency. As we are all aware, the job market and many other things have changed since 1976. Coverage of licensing costs for highly skilled employees, licensed employees, is a common component in salary negotiations in today's job market. Previously, state agencies were strictly limited to negotiations solely on salary, but now recruiters will have the flexibility to offer coverage of professional licensing fees as part of a salary package rather than relying simply on an increase in base salary. As you are all well aware, any increase in base salary comes with the additional cost to the state agency of employer taxes and employer fringes related to that increase. Professionally licensed positions are among some of the most difficult to recruit for in the state of Kansas. This can include anything from IT and cybersecurity roles to social workers, registered nurses, engineers, and lawyers. These individuals must maintain a current license. It's imperative to the performance of their duties. In addition, membership benefits often provide cost savings to state agencies because those individuals will have reduced registration fees for industry conferences, training opportunities, and continuing professional education.
There is a risk that an individual will receive reimbursement and then will leave the state agency shortly thereafter. So to mitigate that risk of those employees leaving, the D of A will work with agencies to develop policies for reimbursement that would recoup costs associated with obtaining the membership if that employee leaves state service within 1 year of maintaining or obtaining that reimbursement. In addition, we will supply agencies with a template that's relevant to these circumstances to ensure consistent application among agencies that choose to reimburse under this regulation. The benefits that we see in encouraging employee participation in professional organization far outweighs the risks to the state. This will be an important tool in particular for employee recruitment, but as well as for retaining and training our employees going forward. I would be happy to stand for any questions from the committee.
Thank you. Committee, any questions? Not seeing any, then thank you very much for appearing today in front of the committee and for your testimony. Appreciate it. Thank you
so much.
Committee, we are now ready for discussion and comments on the proposed rules and regulations that we heard about today from our conferees. We don't have any other conferees or rules or regulations before us, so we'll go ahead and start back at the beginning and with the Department of Revenue. Any proposed comments or for the report? How about Department of Revenue Part 2? Not seeing any. The Insurance Department that we heard from. Kansas Department of Health and Environment. We had a lot of discussion about maybe some regulatory overreach. Didn't know if there were proposed comments that wanted to be suggested for our report. Are there any? Maybe, yes, Senator Tyson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And I do think we need to send a message. We have been working on legislation, tax incentives, programs to help with a daycare crisis in the state of Kansas. And while we are fighting that effort, we have opposing efforts that are understandably, we want to make these facilities as safe as possible, but there comes a point of diminishing returns. And like I said, the example I gave was the child care provider. They've been in business, it's over 30 years, and they're on second generation children. They've never had an accident or a death. Thank you. And so I just think that the department's out of control again. They never reined in. They came back last year and did increase the amount of children that were allowed in a facility, but it's still they're putting these people, these businesses out, and then they wonder why we have a crisis. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Does the research department want to? We're not ready to take a stab at a statement then for our report because we have other comments. Representative Penn and then Representative Wynn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I echo Senator Tyson's comments. I think they're very well put. I go back to the concept of if you want something out of existence, you tax it or you regulate it. We see that in New York back in the day when Mayor Bloomberg wanted to get rid of big drinks. They increased the tax on it so people did not buy them. We saw that where I grew up in Richmond, where we had Philip Morris. When you didn't want people to smoke, they increased the sales tax, consumption tax on a pack of cigarettes and the carton of cigarettes as well. We see that all the time. If you don't want something to exist, what do? You make it more burdensome with regulation and tax. So now, to Senator Tyson's point, if we don't want to have childcare providers to meet the crisis, what do? We give them a whole big, thick piece of regulation, which has the effect of law without coming through the legislature and make them jump through hoops. And I think the question was, how in the world can they read all of this? How can they know what standard they're being held to? They got to hire an attorney just to make sure that they're compliant to massive regulations coming down from the agency and coming down from DC, all without having the people's elected representatives even in the conversation
to protect the people from the overburden. So basically, what that's doing is squeezing them out of the market and out of the space because of the cost of doing business. And I am not a proponent of that. I think that we need to, have them send this to the legislature to join us. So that we could have the legislation that we've been working on and proposing through both chambers take this into account and make sure that it's smart, it's efficient, and it meets the need of the state of Kansas, which is, as Senator Tyson so well put, a child care crisis. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative Wynn.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I respect Senator Tyson's comments, but I think that the gentleman said there are 4,400 providers, and no doubt the provider you were speaking to had real experiences, so I don't question that. But as a family who had a child care facility, this is, how do you read things? You read things, you prepare, and in fact, you actually want the inspector to come and find something because it protects the child. I mean, you may forget to put a outlet cover on, and the inspector will ding you because that outlet cover is not there. So I would I would hope that our comments would say something to the point that perception may be that this is interpreted today as excessive. However, I do not believe it is, and it is, again, as a former provider, you need every little chord addressed because it is, yeah, my dog will chew on it, but you sure don't want your child to chew on it. So I don't, I think we need to be careful in taking the leap. And again, I say, Senator Tyson, for real, do not, I respect that was an issue, but I do not believe that. Let's say, I think we all should agree that the children's safety is first, because I don't agree with the increase in numbers. If you have more than 2 infants and you're a single provider, that's a lot. So when you're saying 4, well, I wouldn't have supported that. So I'm going the other direction. But still, I think we have to consider 4,500 providers and not just take the experience of 1 or 2. Thank you.
Thank you. Committee, other comments? Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'd kind of be interested, we talk about this as a big, thick packet, but in fact, some of it is moving regulations from one section to another. So there's strikeouts in one place and additions in another. So I don't know that I really know and couldn't without sitting down with a word processor to figure out, is this really increasing the amount of regulations that you have to read or not? I think we could be most helpful if we can identify things that are those regulations that providers have addressed or said, here's what's been a problem to me. Because some of these seem to make a lot of sense. We certainly want things to be sanitized, and there are probably new rules and updates in much of this. So if we have comments about regulations, can we be specific about those? I didn't see anything that really troubled me in terms of a change.
Thank you. I think the majority of the committee was feeling that overall the regulations were perhaps overly broad and too expansive. So based on the comments that we've had, I'll ask our research, can you synthesize some of that down to a proposed comment for our report? Or if someone wants to take a stab at it to help her out, I could, but our research department is so effective at putting something together. So we'll let them take a stab at it first for the committee's consideration.
Jill Shelley, Legislative Research, and this is going to be a really rough draft.
Um,
Sure, we can hear you.
Committee has some concerns about the extent of the changes proposed. Wishes to agrees with the agency or something like that about protecting the safety of children in the care of state licensed facilities. Encourages the agency to continue to work with providers on any of the requirements that may be particularly troublesome.
Everyone heard that, Representative Penn.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I appreciate Ms. Shelley taking a stab at that. Some of my concerns, as I raised while we were in the hearing from the conferees, dealing with this one piece on the gun safe regulation. It seems that there's opportunity throughout the offered regulatory updates and stuff for them to backdoor against the legislature current law. So, as I requested, if they can send that back to their legal and let's get a read on that. If as they enforce or execute the regulations that they propose, does it run in contravention to stated Kansas law? Are they raising a different standard that the legislature has not provided for? So when we're talking about that as it pertains to the gun safe, I know that people were asking for specifics. That's one specifically that got me going, as well as when we're looking at the guidance coming down for what standards are to be used. Whether it's EPA induced chemicals or whatever that list is. And I think one other thing that we were also specifically talking about when we were looking at their mitigation strategies that they have and resources thereof for the providers inside of the childcare space to mitigate things like lead paint. How wieldy is that? How cumbersome is that? Uh, the funding and the mechanisms by which these folks can identify that there are issues, get tied up to the right resources to get it mitigated. And is there enough resource there, quantity and quality, as well as the efficiency by which they can access it, that availability? Because I think that as going back to Senator Tyson's point, we are working on a lot of legislation that deals with this. And if we don't have a holistic view of what's coming down the pike, if we're, playing turf wars and playing keep away, we can't make good legislation. So that, and the last point I'll make is that it needs to be sent back to the legislature because a lot of this is overreach by the department into things, promulgating things that the legislature needs to actually consider, debate, and vote upon. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator Francisco.
I hear the concern about a difference between our law and these regulations regarding weapons, but in fact, that's not a change that is being proposed, right? That's something that already exists in the current regulations.
Thank you. Yes, Representative Penn.
And thank you, Madam Chair. Senator Francisco, I do believe, according to the packet, you're right. If it's not underlined or italicized, that means that it's already in the regulations. My concern is now it's being brought to my attention. I don't know the child care regulations. I'm just looking at what they proposed here today. Even if it's already there, it still needs to be a determination made on whether or not the efficacy of it is running contravention to Kansas law. Because then we have a constitutional issue between the executive promulgating regulation with enforcement with the force of law against the legislature's stated law. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator, do you have another comment before I turn to our research?
The other comment was just, I think that there's been an assumption that the EPA disinfectants might be more expensive, but we really don't know that. So it's hard to, say this is putting a burden if that's unknown. So before we question that, I would like to make sure that it really is an issue that is of concern.
Thank you. That then leaves Ms. Shelley with our research department to help us craft a statement that we can put in writing and into the report if that's the will of the committee. So can you give us a draft?
Shelley, Legislative Research. I'm not sure my second draft is going to be better than my first. We do have request the agency to review its regulations and see whether any of the proposals are of particular concern. And among the questions that the committee had were those regarding gun safes, particularly with regard to the recent change in statute, and also to perhaps review EPA approved cleaning products. I would expand probably a little more on that to again say the part about the committee shares the concern for maintaining or ensuring children are safe in licensed facilities.
Yes, and I want to make sure that we capture, there's been comments from several committee members about, is it the, purview of, well, it is the purview of the legislature to make policy, not the regulatory departments, and to always keep that in mind. And I'm not sure what our request is other than consider bringing these types of substantive changes to the legislature for the vetting through the legislative process. Representative Penn.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and that was a good capture. And Ms. Shelley, I would blow it out a little bit bigger. It's not necessarily about the cleaning supplies and whether or not that's the problem. The theme is that, as the testimony from the proponent was, is that they are increasing their regulations in order to be compliant with federal guidance coming down, okay, in order to access and retain federal dollars for the program. The biggest problem that I see is that for us to jump through those hoops in order to get those carrots, we have to, here in the state of Kansas, accept regulations or regulatory guidance coming down from the DC administration, whether it be the EPA, that's one example, but rife throughout this packet are other upgrades coming out of DC. What I would like to see, if I may, is some type of breakdown about what exactly is being pushed down from DC. What is the impact, fiscal, otherwise, to actually promulgate and execute those new regulatory guidances, and where do they stand? If it's EPA, if it's some other type of thing, I understand we have a burden and a thought toward maintaining safety for children. I've said that time and again. I'm completely on board with that. My concern is overreach of the federal bureaucracy governing and directing Kansas law, because the agency is pushing out increased burden regulation from DC with the force of law over and above and outside of the legislature taking a look at it.
Thank you. Jill, did you have a chance to think about that and maybe add that to our draft?
I will try, Madam Chair. The committee requests specific information about which of these changes are to maintain compliance with federal law and the economic impact on the agency and on providers of those changes.
Thank you. And remember, committee, there are going to be draft minutes for approval, and we can then make further changes to what's going to be written and sent to us for approval. We can discuss those at our next meeting as well. Representative Penn, did you have? Okay, great. Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm looking at the Kansas Administrative Regulations Economic Impact Statement, and this is towards the end of the packet. And it starts out by saying, the first question is, are the proposed rules and regulations mandated by the federal government as a requirement for participating in or implementing a federally subsidized or assisted program? And the answer is no. So then I'm trying to go back and figure out what we've
I think there was testimony to the contrary about that.
And I think that's what I'm heard, but I'm wondering if this is just the regulations that are listed above, or all of them, or it may be, but it talks about participating or implementing a federally subsidized or assistant program. So if that's not the case, maybe we need to be asking a different question. Because I do think the committee would want to know, is there a federal requirement, and is that why we're doing this? But
I think that's what we have proposed. I think that's what Ms. Shelley is going to capture.
But then the questions that we ask all the agencies should reflect that. And if somehow you can answer this no, we ought to try to understand how that happened and what the regulations are. I think we also have to, I'm looking at a lot of the changes and I'm saying, okay, they're taking tobacco and then they're using smoking products, right? So, which is much broader and probably we want to be broader. They are eliminating the something about a pit bull. So they're, instead of just saying, oh, you can't have a pit bull, they're much more specific about a animal that may be dangerous. So in some ways, I think we also have to acknowledge when they're loosening the regulations and making it easier. So that goes back to the increase in the number of children and some other regulations. So I'd like to make sure that it also says we recognize what in these changes is reducing that challenge of regulations.
Thank you. And Ms. Shelley has her work cut out for her to go back and listen to all of this and synthesize it down into our report suggestion. Yes, Representative Penn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is more of a comment, and thank you, Senator, for bringing that to our attention. That's great. That we all witnessed, and you can run the tape back. The gentleman Derek said that the reason that they were promulgating this is because they needed to get the dollars, and to the contrary, they said no twice, no right here and no right here. So that's a problem with the testimony. Was something incorrect then, or is this incorrect? That's the type of stuff that I'm talking about. By that same extension, the default mode of Kansas should not be, let's promulgate a crap ton of regulation in order to get money without giving Kansas the opportunity to say, we either reject or accept those strings for that money. That comes through the legislature, not through the agency. That's what I'm talking about.
Thank you. Committee, are there other comments regarding Department of Health and Environment? Not seeing any, then Department Wildlife and Parks. Board of Cosmetology. Department of Administration. Okay, then we will see a draft of the minutes and we can discuss those that are, and the report as well. And the draft of the report as well. And we have already decided our next meeting will be June 20th, 9 a.m. In this same room. And with that, then, if there's no other business before the committee thanks everyone for their attendance today, our conferees, our staff, we couldn't do it without you, and for the committee members as well. Thank you for following along online, and the committee meeting is adjourned.